Alright, hey everybody, welcome back to another briefing for today, 22 May 2021. We're just going to give it another minute or so for people to get in. I know it takes a while for the notifications to swing around to everybody, so let's just wait for just about a minute or so and then we'll get started. Alright everybody, welcome again to another briefing for the S2 Underground project for Saturday, 22 May 2021. Hope everybody's having a good Saturday. We thought we would drop one on Saturday since I had this afternoon free, and yeah, we might have a light crowd, but it's alright. We'll go ahead and punch through the slides because we've got a lot of little things to talk about today, so let's go ahead and make it happen. So let me bring up my controller here. Alright, so as far as weather goes, really no big surprises coming up over the next 12 hours or so. It looks like the Midwest is going to have the best weather for evading visual surveillance, at least. If that were to be an issue for a lot of people, really not a concern right now. But again, just wanted to cover it. Really low cloud ceilings over really the entirety of the Midwest, and the Pacific Northwest has got some pretty atrocious weather, looks like, coming up over the next day or so. Looks like EENT, or the end of evening nautical twilight, is at 21:29, at least for local Eastern time tonight. And yeah, just moving into summer, we're having fewer and fewer hours of complete and total darkness. So that sun finishing setting at around 9:30 at night, that's not a whole lot of hours of darkness to do what you've got to do. And especially considering that the moon, the lunar illumination for tonight is 79.2%. So right there in that green illume phase, unless you've got clouds overhead, it's going to be a pretty bright night tonight. So might not even need night vision if you were to do anything outside. And then just showing the clouds a little bit differently. As you can see, Midwest is getting hammered with a lot of decently bad weather. I would say, I would guess. We've got tops breaking out. Let's see here, Midwest around 80,000 feet or so, or sorry, 8,000 feet. Big difference there. So you've got a really low cloud ceiling and a really thick cloud layer. So there's also some decently bad weather, some warnings, some air mets coming up in the Pacific Northwest as well as the Northeast, just a little bit. But that's going to be your cloud cover for the next 18 hours. And pushing into NOTAMs, really nothing surprising. Not a whole lot of cool ones out there or interesting ones. I did find one that anybody can look into if they're interested. It looks like a presidential one. I have no idea what it's for. But let me make sure. Let's see here. You guys having trouble hearing me? Hello, testing. That's odd. All right, sweet. Sorry, sorry for the delay there. It looks like might be some audio issues. I'm always fighting audio issues because I'm here by myself today. So, yeah, let me. Sorry for that break there for just a second. But yeah, as far as NOTAMs, not a whole lot of interesting ones. Just a presidential one. There's always two when it comes to presidential slides, or when it comes to presidential NOTAMs. There's an inner cordon and an outer cordon, which again confirms it is a presidential one, and they were using the presidential authority and presidential code. So Hagerstown, Thurmont, Maryland. Don't know what it's for. Probably some kind of flight because it's scheduled for today and into a couple of days from now, the 24th. So probably a some kind of trip. For the president. Who knows? Don't know. Kind of interesting. As far as NOTAMs, sorry, notices to airmen. We have a special video on this. If you don't know what I'm talking about so far when it comes to weather or NOTAMs, and you haven't seen our prior briefings before, go check out some of our other really short videos that explain why this stuff's kind of important to know. So yeah, that's probably what it is. And then as far as our civil unrest forecast, we've got a couple of pretty strong additions this week. So first of all, Minneapolis, usual stuff. The anniversary of George Floyd's death is coming up here pretty soon, and the family will be at the White House. We just learned a few minutes ago. I just saw it on social media or something like that. And then, of course, Elizabeth City, Andrew Brown shooting, that continues to be an enduring sort of moderate to low riot potential there just because it's so remote. Portland, Oregon, always constantly on fire. Everybody knows. Also, the election audit is still going on in Phoenix, Arizona. As far as I can tell, it hasn't ended. It's just media coverage is zero on it. And then for the big two, the big scary red icons at the bottom, Atlanta and New York City. We'll talk about this more when I talk about Israel here in a bit. But as a result of the Israeli conflict, the sort of 11-day war, which I guess is what it's being called now. There isn't a name for it as far as I know yet, so we're just going to stick with 11-day war. Ceasefire was on Friday, allegedly. We don't know how well that's holding up. It seems to be holding up, but as a result of any time there's conflict of this magnitude, which I would definitely call it a war, anytime there's conflict between Israel and Gaza, or Israel and Palestine, or whatever you want to call it, there is always activism in the United States. And considering that the conflict was so bad in Israel, we've got a lot of conflict here in the United States too, which of course not a whole lot of people are talking about, which is interesting to me, I think. Especially in New York City, there have been outright riots and attacks, and like brutal, vicious attacks on Jewish citizens and Israeli supporting citizens in the streets. I haven't seen any the other way, which it might be biased to say this, but hey, it's the truth. There usually isn't any anti-Palestinian movement that gets squarely. Like, there was an explosive device that went off in New York at a protest / demonstration / whatever you want to call it. Still don't know anything about that one, but you can find a lot of stuff about what's going on in New York specifically from social media and whatnot. They haven't quite figured out how to ban those keywords yet, but yeah, a lot of pro-Palestinian supporters in the United States, and a lot of violence coming out of that. Even though the ceasefire is in effect and the war is basically over temporarily, I guess, there is still a lot of violence out there, especially in Atlanta as well. We saw a pretty decently sized riot outside the Israeli consulate. That's why there's a marker for Atlanta, is because there is an Israeli consulate there. And also for Atlanta, we've got increased potential for civil unrest for Atlanta for the near future because, as I'll mention here in a bit, there's an election audit going on, or it just got the approval to start. So yeah, it's not super great for New York City and Atlanta. Now, of course, it's not like the end of the world for New York. Chances are, if you live in New York City, you probably didn't even see any of these attacks because they tend to happen pretty quickly and then they're just out of the way. But yeah, there's been a lot of violence in New York City over the past couple of days, particularly around like Jewish quarter places where the Palestinians and the Jewish population are in really densely populated areas. So, something to keep in mind, something to be on the lookout for as we move forward. And then moving into our list of other planned events, we've got really two big ones on the calendar: 12 June and 26 June. For general, kind of vague, unknown pro-Second Amendment group protests, demonstrations, sort of whatever. Don't really know what to make of these because we've seen a lot of flyers going around, and like we've mentioned before, these flyers don't have any logos on them. They're just like, they just say, "We will not comply," and then have a date, or it says like all state capitals at, on a certain day. Nobody really knows what they're for. My guess is based on, I've been looking a lot of the art styles, and the cool part about a lot of these artists who are drawing these posters and things like that is that they're not terribly original, and they tend to copy their previous work. So I can find a poster that's really similar to a former one, or one where somebody posted on their personal page, and I can figure out what group they're from. And a lot of these posters are coming from Mike Dunn's outfit, and really just general Proud Boys stuff. So I don't know what to make of it. It's just kind of like a, hey, this is what's going on notification. But yeah, I would be very kind of wary of these unknown groups saying we're going to go protest, especially now, with things being the way they are. And then, of course, the high riot potential for really any pro-Palestine group. If you see a pro-Palestinian protest on your local news in your local area, I would advise staying away from that because these tend to get very, very kinetic. Unlike any other group, like BLM and Antifa protests are not as kinetic as pro-Palestine protests tend to be. So that's just a rule of thumb that we tend to go by here in the shop. And then moving forward, switching gears slightly into our logistics slide. So as we can see, gas shortage is almost over. We're still seeing some pretty good shortages for a lot of gas stations in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, the big four right there. They're still having an issue with gasoline. Now, you can go, I'm sure everybody has done this already, but you can go on to the Gas Buddy app or preferably the website from a non-trackable browser and then see what the gas availability is in your area. Here's a caveat, though. In just my own personal experience and a couple of our other guys that are spread around the Virginia, North Carolina area, even a couple of guys in Georgia, we've noticed that the app isn't quite accurate because by the time Gas Buddy figures out that there's gas at a place, it's gone. Or they don't have regular gas. They only have like plus or premium or whatever it's called at a particular station, their power setting, whatever. So that's something to keep in mind is that the Gas Buddy app has a hard time tracking what kinds of fuel are available. So you might end up paying a lot of money for fuel in these four states still to this day. And then also the microchip shortage has gotten very severely worse. It's starting to directly affect automobile factories in the United States. Actually, a Jeep factory in northern Illinois is going to lay off 1,600 workers specifically because of this microchip shortage. They can't roll the Jeeps off the line because they don't have the chips to finish them, so the assembly lines are more or less stopped. And rather than pay workers to stand there and not do anything, they're laying them off, which is unfortunate to be sure. But if they're laying off workers, then that means that it's not like they're going to be down for a day or two. They're thinking long term. And we're already starting to see a lot of foreign cars and manufacturers of foreign cars change their designs very radically to omit certain electronics, which I think that's a good move. The fewer chips in my car, the better, I think. But it's going to affect car prices and more specifically car availability. And also, for the chicken shortage, I know everybody's probably seen this on social media or whatnot. The chicken shortage has gotten a lot worse. We noticed in our specific local area, so this is more of a case study, more of an anecdote. We've seen chicken rationing start in our area. So our grocery stores are not letting you buy as much chicken as you want. They're limiting it to like 2 packages a person or something like that. So yeah, it's starting to affect the consumer market, at least for us directly. Now, I should caveat that by saying that we here in our local area have been rationing food since COVID started. We've had, it's almost like every time I go to buy food, there is a limit on something. So if it's not beef one day, it's chicken the next day or pork the next day. Like for instance, I went to the grocery store the other day and I saw a single pork tenderloin for $28, I think. And I thought that's outrageous because that's normally like $4 in our area here on the East Coast in the Mid-Atlantic region and like close to the pork capital of the world, So yeah, rationing of chicken, it might spread. I don't know what's causing this. I think it's probably a variety of reasons, but hey, the food shortages continue. If you haven't learned that food shortages are now a thing we've got to live with, then here's your wake-up call, I guess. Let's see here, and then moving on to the meat of the slides. So I've got 2 of these slides. We've got a lot to talk about. So a lot of little things, nothing really gigantic that leaps out, just so you guys know. So running down the slide here, the first one is the DoD has released their plan to openly and they're not even trying to hide the fact that they're going to surveil service members' social media accounts. Now, a lot of people are freaking out about this, as well they should, but I would also like to point out that this is not new. I can personally testify that at least in 2018, the SF-86, Standard Form 86, which is the form that you fill out to get a security clearance or to start the reinvestigation process, at least in 2018, that SF-86 was changed to include a clause that states that if you are a service member applying for a security clearance, you are required to give us permission to look at your social media. Now, it was a very small clause. Anybody who's familiar with the SF-86 knows that it's like a stack of paperwork. It is your entire life in like a 100-page document or something like that. I forget how many pages it actually is, but at the very, very end, there's that little gotcha clause of, hey, let us look at your social media. And at least in 2018, I think it started before that. I think it would, but I first became aware of it in 2018, being a part of the security investigation thing. So, well, what does that mean? And, I'm speaking more or less directly to anybody who's in the military, I guess, but like, hey, look, they're already monitoring your stuff or have the permission to monitor your stuff from your security clearance paperwork. So thing one. Thing two, they're now overtly saying they're going to collect on you. So, what does that mean? I don't, if I don't know how any other way to put it is like, this is concerning. You should probably not have a social media account if you're in the military these days. So yeah, it's something to keep in mind. I know it doesn't really mean a whole lot for civilians out there right now, but it's definitely concerning considering how things have been going. And then up next, the one everybody has been talking about all over the internet, the latest ATF shenanigans. So I myself am not an expert on this. I just write PowerPoints for a living. I'm not a shooter. I'm not somebody that is in that sort of field. So there are lots of other people whose entire lives are dedicated to following what the heck the ATF is doing now. So go check those guys out. I trust them a lot more than I trust me on it. But the short, skinny version of it seems to be that they're going after pistol braces again, and they're trying to change the rules of what defines a receiver. Those are the two big ones that leap out in my mind. And if you are so inclined, the comments, the ATF has put these rule changes online for public comment if you are so inclined. My own thoughts on that are kind of mixed, but I will say, I would like to point out, just as a point of, hey, this happened. Remember when the ATF originally tried to go after pistol braces, they backed off because of public comments. So take that for what it's worth. You guys can make your own decisions and do what you want to do on that, but I just want to let you know that's happening. Number 3 is something that I'm guessing probably nobody's heard about. And so this is kind of a long story, but the short version of it is that in Mobile, Alabama, one of the sheriff's deputies, Captain Shane Stringer, was fired because of legislation he introduced. Now, Captain Stringer was moonlighting as a sheriff's deputy, and he's actually, in his real job, is an elected state representative, and he introduced legislation to allow constitutional carry in the state of Alabama. Well, the sheriff, Sam Cochran, for that area, decided that's not going to fly, so he fired him from the sheriff's department. And here's the interesting part. Here's the last little part that makes all the difference. He did this openly. He's publicly stating that he is being fired because of his, quote, different political views held by his administration. So the sheriff is openly firing somebody for their views. And, I know that's probably not really surprising, but it's interesting that it happened to be an elected official that he's doing this to. So, I know this probably not groundbreaking news, but it is interesting to note that more and more of this stuff is happening, and it's probably going to get worse into the future. So, moving on to the 4th one, this one is probably the most important one on the slide. And this one is surrounding the Conservation Reserve Program. Now, to understand what this program is, this is a federal program that goes back to the late 80s. And what it is, it's still around today. What it is an incentive program for farmers to turn their fields that they're not using back into wildlife preserves. So the idea being that if you're a farmer and you've got some land that's really not that great, or it becomes, muddy and you can't grow stuff there, the federal government will subsidize you to turn that into a nature preserve, sort of. The exact law is a lot more complex than that, but that's the gist of what it's supposed to do. Well, here's the deal. A couple of days ago, the Biden administration quietly announced that they're planning to expand this program. Well, what does that mean? Well, in short, it takes a program that sounded okay on paper. Like you can even go back to the 80s when this thing was first introduced and say this was probably not a great thing. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the bill going back that far, but so you could definitely make the argument this was never a good idea in the beginning. But you can definitely say also right now that essentially what the Biden regime or administration, whatever you want to call them, essentially what they're doing is paying farmers to not grow food. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a super great idea, especially considering the food shortages we're having. Like the past year or year and a half, 2 years, ever since COVID started, was the first time that I can remember having food shortages in the United States. Even during like hurricanes or other natural disasters, there haven't been any food shortages. Well, now there are, and now the Biden administration just so happen to be supporting a program that is going to pay farmers up to 1.5 times, sometimes up to like 3 or 4 times the value of their crops, the crops they would have grown, just to leave their fields bare. So yeah, not super great. I'm not saying that this is going to result in like food shortages, widespread famine and hunger tomorrow, but I am saying this is yet another nail in the coffin of our food shortage situation. It's not good. It can only hurt things moving forward as far as our food security goes. And we've been saying for months now that, and not just us, but other more educated people on the subject have been saying for months, hey, food shortages are coming. And this does not bode well for that. And then finally, on this slide, everybody also has probably seen Donald Trump is being targeted again. This time, this is more interesting because this is now a criminal investigation that is being launched by the New York Attorney General, who has stated publicly, even before she took office or was put in that position, that she would try to find a way to invent evidence against, the previous president. So I don't know how legitimate that is. Probably not very legitimate, but yet it's just yet another like checkbox of, oh well, okay, political dissidents are getting targeted now. So hey, not super great news all the way around. But moving forward onto the next slide, we've got even more stuff. So this is going more viral than I had expected, which is good. Jeffrey Epstein's back in the news again, in that a couple of days ago, his guards were given a plea deal for admitting that they had falsified prison records. So I'm sure that, especially if you're watching this video, you know how the whole thing went down, so I'm not going to rehash any of that, but it's now just kind of making it official that they did in fact lie and said and forged their like watch logs that said they checked him at a certain time in order to accept a plea deal, and neither of them are going to jail as expected. I don't think anybody expected those guys to go to jail ever. But yeah, they should probably watch their backs just because of how hot this situation is. And then also, like I briefly mentioned on the Atlanta slide, Georgia, a judge, specifically in Fulton County, has ordered that 145 ballots to be unsealed in the Atlanta area in order to examine them for fraud. So it looks like Georgia wants a piece of that action when it comes to election fraud slash integrity type stuff. Arizona has been in the news lately. Well, now Georgia is in the news again, and as a result, I would expect that to draw a lot of people into Atlanta to make sure that event gets hindered as much as possible. So, also moving along, switching gears very quite significantly, the presidential administration slash regime has announced, and it's gaining traction. I just checked again, and it's going viral on social media. The Biden administration partnering with dating apps to get people vaccinated, or at least pressure them into doing so by giving them perks on all kinds of dating apps and stuff. And I would just like to point out that from an Intel perspective, this is literally the oldest trick in the book. The honeypot trick works. It works on everybody to some degree, and this is the Biden administration taking advantage of that. So as far as a list of apps that are collaborating with the regime, these are, forgive me if I mispronounce some of these, I've never heard of some of these, but apparently they're a thing. Tinder, of course, the biggest one, and then Hinge, Bumble, Badoo, OkCupid, Kispa, whatever. BLK, Match.com, and Plenty of Fish are all offering some kind of incentive to working directly with the federal, specifically the White House, to get people incentivized to have get the vaccine. So, yeah, make of that what you will. But hey, these kind of things, they work really, really well, and apparently the regime's figured it out. So there you go. Also in Oregon, I'm surprised it took this long, but Oregon is leading the way when it comes to repeating history all over again. As of a couple of days ago, the Oregon federal government is requiring, or not federal government, the Oregon state government is requiring all businesses to check vaccine paperwork before they enter a business, if you wish to go without a mask, allegedly. It's kind of vague. I've seen very conflicting news reports. I've seen a couple of press releases from the government that is intentionally vague, I think, so that they can, encourage people to do whatever they want, I suppose. But from what it sounds like if you're a major business in the state of Oregon, you've got to have bouncers at your door to make sure people can't enter unless you check their papers. So once again, we saw this coming. We've taken measures to mitigate this as much as we can. And if you're in Oregon, yeah, do your best. Make good decisions, I suppose. But I don't know how well this will be enforced. My guess is probably, based on how Oregon is, I lived in Oregon for a while. I can probably guess that in the Cascades, in the eastern part of the state, they're not going to do this. But in the Willamette Valley, particularly from like Portland to probably Eugene, it's going to be bad. So that would be my guess. And then finally, the 10th one is President Biden was observed to be fake driving. Now here's the cool part about this. These videos came out. Several videos came out from different angles that show while Biden was at the Ford manufacturing plant in Dearborn, Michigan, he was test driving a new pickup truck. And the passenger, who was assumed to be a Secret Service agent, also had a steering wheel in front of his seat, and it seems like the Secret Service agent was driving, and Biden was not actually in control of the vehicle. So we'll let everybody see what the video actually is. Hopefully this won't crash everything. If it does, forgive me. We'll have to restart this whole thing. But I just wanted to show everybody the video on this slide right here, if I can get it to play without any serious lag. Let's see here. Yeah, you can see quite clearly, like, the regime / most mainstream media has stated that it is not a steering wheel. It is a camera, is what they said it was. And then I saw other reports fact-checking that Biden was, in fact, driving the car. Well, like, look at the video yourself and make your own decision. I think it's hilarious that they expect people to believe that that was actually a camera. Like, that's hilarious. Why does it matter? I don't know that it does matter. I just think that it's interesting, and I think that it's interesting that the administration thinks they can get away with that and people wouldn't notice. Like, look at where the camera is at right now. That's an odd angle. You can barely see Biden in the driver's seat there, or I guess it should be the passenger seat, but there you go on that. Really no intel value from that other than it's interesting. But yeah, and then speaking of something that also doesn't really have that much intel value, this occurred So I wanted to talk about it because it's kind of important to like see and understand and all that kind of stuff. So the United States Army has come out with a recruiting ad campaign. It's not just one commercial; it's a lot of commercials and materials and all kinds of literature and artwork and stuff like that that has come out. That is very, I think it falls under the definition of being woke. So, as one might expect, if you watch, I'm not going to play the actual ad because it's slightly like disturbing. I'm not one to get really triggered about stuff, but man, this particular ad right here, it made me slightly nauseated to watch. But in conjunction with this, a few politicians, a few people who have much more wider audience than we do, have said, "Hey, look, this United States military is trying to recruit woke people, whereas Russia and China are not. They're recruiting their normal. They're doing their normal, like, you know, Rambo, gritty, edgy, really cool, manly ads." So in the United States is very clearly not. So if you want to look this up, the video will be in the description. But I think when I saw this, I immediately had to calm down a little bit so I could think clearly because it's so like, man, I tell you. But really, in me trying to figure out some benefit, something to learn from this ad, I would say that really this is it. That our previous assessments and thoughts and just general like loose opinions that the U.S. military is moving, this woke stuff is not just a it's not just a trend, it is becoming doctrine. And that's really the key takeaway here is that this kind of stuff, I can guarantee you I could probably find 5 or 6 soldiers in the whole army that think this ad is a good one. The vast majority of people have been quite colorful in their descriptions of it. So, that's good news, I suppose, but the it definitely does seem like the senior military leadership is making concerted efforts to weed out political conservatism and bring in a more woke military. Um, what benefit that might have? Well, it's not going to have a benefit in it's going to hurt us in a foreign conflict. But once again, just we have to keep remembering that senior military officials and the federal government think that their biggest enemy is you. So they see domestic issues as being their biggest threat. So of course they're going to go for a woke military, or at least try to. Will they succeed? I highly doubt it, because I don't know about anybody else out there, but I personally think that military service is not something that lends itself well to extreme leftist ideology. So I don't think it will be successful, but in the meantime, we're kind of stuck looking at ads like this. And then, kind of to circle back to the earlier issue, smartphones are becoming, technology in general, but specifically smartphones, are becoming an issue, specifically for military personnel. And I know I've spoken a lot directly to military personnel, but like, look what's going on. We've got soldiers being spied on, now dating apps, which guess what? Like, find me a soldier who's like a low ranking soldier who's living in the barracks who does not use Tinder. Like, we all know what's going on there. Everybody does it. The thing is, though, is that you combine that with the ideological purging and then all these other stories about how military service people are being tracked all over the place. Like, why do you think that's happening? This is not good. The thing is that a lot of military units are very savvy. Well, at least from a doctrine side of things, they're savvy when it comes to OPSEC, right? Like, everybody has that first sergeant or that weird S2 guy who's been saying like, "Hey, if you're going to deploy, turn your stuff off. Don't post pictures. Don't geotag." Yeah, but they haven't adapted, right? So you've got briefings like, I remember giving a first briefing on OPSEC, like 9 or 10 years ago, in which that was the first time I mentioned, hey, don't geotag photos, because at the time that was a big thing. Geotagging photos was a huge OPSEC thing, and previously we didn't have smartphones, or they weren't that common, but it started becoming a huge thing. So I remember that was the first time like we really started thinking about it. Well, you attend an S2 briefing today for most units, and they're going to say, yeah, don't geotag photos. Well, yeah, that's good, but that's not enough. Like right now, military and intelligence personnel can be tracked with the untapped beer app. So what does that tell you? It tells you that not geotagging your stuff is not good enough. You go to Poland or you go to Germany or some other base around the country and you fire up Tinder, somebody's tracking you. And I can guarantee you that it's probably a nation state, either ours or Russia or China or somebody. So I know that it's kind of ridiculous to suggest for everybody to just kind of avoid smartphones. Don't use apps. Don't do anything like that. That's not feasible. That's not possible. And I don't. It is possible, but it's just not feasible for most people. So I guess really the moral of the story is, if you're going to use a smartphone, be smart about it, and remember that online everything is tracked and nothing is secure. So that's something to think about moving forward. And then talking about this. So this is this is something that I did not want to talk about because it seems very Alex Jonesy and very conspiratorial, I guess. But there have been so many videos I've found. I was just looking over the past few days. There have been so many videos that I cannot ignore this anymore, and I figured I might as well talk about it and see what everybody else thinks. So the story here is injection sites from a certain injection that I can't say on YouTube because they will shut down this video. These injections resulting in the person's arm being magnetized at the point of injection. So, we thought this was a hoax, as this seems like it's very much a hoax, until we started seeing hundreds of videos like this, and we've had even staff members' families check this out, and no kidding, it's real. I've seen it with my own two eyes. I don't know how widespread it is, but I do find it interesting that very shortly after the these videos started going viral, not on Twitter or Facebook because they ban them automatically, but places like Rumble, I guess, and other platforms, when they were going viral on those, the FDA comes out and says, hey, if you got the shot from a certain medical provider from a certain time, you might have a piece of a needle stuck in your arm. The FDA issues an advisory saying, hey, these needles might be leaving pieces of metal in people's arms. Okay, that's interesting. Also, the extreme, if you look at the mainstream media, that's what they're going with. There isn't a direct line that's being drawn right now. There might be, I haven't checked in a few hours, but there isn't a direct line between this and the magnetic arms. It looks like everybody's just kind of ignoring the fact that people have seemed like there's some kind of metal in their arm. So, here's what we think it might be. As you can see here, here's the video of, I'm putting this on here. I'll kill the audio so you can actually hear me. But yeah, magnets sticking to people's arms. Not something that is unconcerning for sure. It's definitely something that's really weird. So yeah. Of course, videos like this can be easily faked. We've got deep fakes out there that are insane nowadays, and you can do it on a smartphone. However, I don't think most of these are fakes. But here's what we think it could be. And this is just me spitballing as a non-medical provider. No, well, some decent medical training, but nothing like on paper, I suppose I should say. I've got three main theories. One, that the microchip theory is the one that jumps out first. I don't think so. It's possible, I guess, but I don't think so. I've been doing TTL work for the federal government for a long time, and at TTL, tagging, tracking, and locating, putting bugs in places where they're not supposed to be, right? Electronic bugs and electronic surveillance and stuff like that. And I don't know of any microchip or bug or sensor that is that small. Small enough to go through a 28 gauge needle. Now I know there are like Guinness World Records of things like a circuit board inside the eye of a needle. Like, I know that's a thing, but as far as mass surveillance, I don't know of anything that small, because as far as I know, this is the kind of thing that I have. This is about as close as you're going to get, like a veterinary tag. Like you put a chip in your dog, get your dog microchipped. That's about as small. You could probably get a little smaller, but that's about as small as I think of when that sort of, when we're talking about microchips. So I don't know if the microchip explanation is the best explanation. The other theory is the one that the administration is pushing, which is there are broken needles. This is possible. This is actually possible, and it happens a lot more often than people might think. Um, but here's the thing. A lot of these injections, as far as I know, are subcutaneous. They're being injected into the fatty tissues just beneath the surface of the skin. Short needle, very thin needle. Some of the injections, I think, based on footage I've seen, are actually intramuscular. Longer needle, thicker needle, and these are where you actually have the higher chance for needles breaking off, is when it's going into the muscle, increased resistance. It just increases your chances you might break a needle off. Well, here's the thing. It's going to bleed quite profusely. I don't know of a way for a needle to break off and be underneath the skin to the point where it doesn't leave any evidence of something happening. I'm sure it's possible. We've seen in the past a lot of times needles hitting bone and fracturing a piece of the bone off or a piece of the tip of the needle. So I mean, it's possible, I suppose, but I just don't buy it. Mostly because the federal government said it, and secondly because it doesn't seem possible or plausible considering the method of injection we're seeing for most of these injections. And then the third one is just kind of a guess, I suppose, but in theory, it could be some kind of heavy metal. I would think. Once again, this is all just conjecture and just really just me spitballing out loud, I guess, but it seems like that would work if there was some kind of ferrous metal that is injected underneath the skin. But even then, like, I immediately rule it out also because it wouldn't be localized. Like on some of these videos, you can actually see like somebody holding the magnet away from like a really strong like neodymium or rare earth magnet, and you could see something moving underneath the skin. Like that's freaky. And I don't know that a liquid could operate like that. Plus, once again, you'd be able to feel it. I just don't know what it is. And it wouldn't be as pinpoint localized as some of these issues are. So I don't know. I just wanted to put this in there, one, so that the internet has some kind of record that this was actually going on this day, on the 22nd of May 2021, and also to see what does everybody else think it is. And hopefully some healthcare providers will actually like let us know what is going on here. Because this is becoming an issue to where a freelance intel agency like us are having to cover this because it's becoming hard to ignore, right? So, yeah, moving on to international issues, we're almost finished for today. Obviously, the big one, Israel, 11-day war, really no other name for it. Right now, the ceasefire seems to be good. However, we're following a lot of militants on social media, particularly on Twitter, where they are allowed to flourish. They're definitely still very strong. Hamas claimed victory, as you might expect, and Hezbollah has done the same. I don't know if they've done it from their highest up, but yeah, I don't know if this conflict is over or not because it looks like the troops we're seeing in Gaza, Hamas fighters, they're still itching to fight. So hopefully this peace will hold, because conflict in that area of the world is just not good for anybody. And then ending on an interesting note, there's some stuff going down in Belgium. So Belgium is dealing with some things, and one of them is what is being touted on social media as the Belgian Rambo. So here's the skinny on this one. Corporal Jurgen Koenigs, or Koenigs, however it's pronounced. I didn't know if it was an umlaut over the top or not. He is currently hiding out in the Hoge Kempen forest in Belgium, the national park there in Belgium, after he was discovered surveilling the top Belgian COVID expert at their home. Now, basically the Belgian version of Dr. Fauci is who this guy was after, and since his discovery, he has been observed to have gone AWOL from his unit, taking with him 4, quote, rocket launchers, a belt-fed machine gun, and ammunition. Knowing what I know about Belgian defenses, the rocket launchers that they're not naming are probably AT-4s, maybe. That'd be my guess. Anything bigger than that, it'd be harder to carry 4 of them. And belt-fed machine guns, I don't know what kind of belt-fed the Belgian forces are using now. So some kind of belt-fed. And yeah, he's in the woods. Interestingly enough, apparently the reason behind this is that he's planning quite literally to go Rambo on everybody, waging guerrilla warfare in order to combat the very harsh COVID lockdowns. So what everybody in the United States here has been spouting off about on social media is actually happening in Belgium, at least with one guy. So it's interesting to see how this holds out. My guess is he's probably not going to last very long. However, this dude's pretty smart. He's not a small dude by any means. He's pretty jacked, and also he has demonstrated tactical capabilities. For instance, he booby-trapped his own car with a grenade that was set to explode when the door was opened. I was on a little tripwire, so this dude's not just some PFC who goes missing from Fort Jackson with an unloaded rifle. This dude is an actual threat to the people that he's after. Right now, the Belgian military is after him. They've got like a division out there looking for him in the forest, and they're using thermal sights, so they'll probably find him pretty soon. However, the forest he's in is pretty close to the Dutch border, so this dude might actually be able to hop over the border and get away. Who knows? My personal bet is he's probably not going to last long, and this will be quietly shut down. But we never know. This kind of thing is very unfortunate. I think it's interesting from an analytical perspective, but all those people out there who've been saying that this is the kind of stuff that's needed. I urge you to take a look at how this one's going to work out. My guess is it's probably not going to end the lockdowns. No, that's not a guess. I'm going to assess with high confidence that this dude going AWOL with a buttload of weapons and explosives is not going to end their country's lockdowns. So who knows? But before we ended, I did get a message on Patreon, and I forgot. Sorry, I did not build a slide for this, but I did want to address it because it is fascinating. I don't know what to make of it, but it's one of those things where it's like, hey, this is kind of interesting. We should probably check more into it, but we're never going to find any more information about it. But the usage of directed energy weapons on U.S. soil. So I saw this come out a couple of interesting things come out over the past week or so when it comes to directed energy weapons. Whether or not they exist or not is another issue, I suppose, but allegedly for a few years now, I heard about this through like intel channels. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. There's a couple of Defense Intelligence Agency guys got really, really, really sick at some unnamed place in Europe, and they thought that it was what has been coined since then as Havana Syndrome. Basically, some kind of weird sci-fi unknown weapon, directed energy weapon like a microwave gun of some kind, that is being used to target people and make them sick and make them go home. That's at least the prevailing logic in the intel community, as far as I know. Like my little hole in the wall, that's what I had heard about it. Like it's all rumor. Nobody ever gets a briefing on these things, right? People hear about, okay, these things are made to make people go home and get sick with no like actual explanation for them. So symptoms include things like headaches, blurry vision, extreme nausea, paranoia, stuff like that. And it happens very, very quickly. And since it's a microwave weapon, allegedly, we don't know what it is. So it doesn't leave it's not like a gunshot. It doesn't leave any poison behind. It's not like, the traditional Russian methods of polonium in someone's tea, right? So it doesn't leave any evidence behind. So we don't know what it is. And since we don't know what it is, since there is no evidence of it, we're not even sure if this is real or not. I just based on what I've been hearing over the past few years, I'm more inclined to believe that it is real. I don't know why. Maybe it's just naivety, but I think that this kind of technology exists, and theoretically it's possible. However, kind of going back to what I mentioned on, gosh, how long ago was that? A few podcasts ago, where I mentioned that, like, look, you've got to realize who has the motivation to lie. So the U.S. government is the only source for directed energy weapons being used. So, um, they have the means, motive, and opportunity to lie about this. They have the power to make everything up, and nobody can verify because they're never going to release their sources. Nobody's ever come forward publicly and stated, "Hey, I'm the victim of a directed energy weapon. Here's what happened to me." Nobody's done that. Maybe in a few years we'll have that. People, get read out of programs and get out, and they stop working for the feds, and we can hear about it. But right now, there's not a whole lot of information out there. I do think, however, that let's just play the what if game for a second and say that if it is real, if these directed energy weapons are real, which I think they are, but let's just say they are, and they are being used by most likely Russia or China. Like, let's be honest, those are the two big players that would do this. Of course, the United States does the same thing as well. I don't mean to seem like, yeah, go USA, we never do anything wrong. No, we're probably doing the same exact thing in Russia and China. They just haven't figured it out yet. But my guess is when it comes to Americans being targeted, it's probably Russia or China. But let's just say that is happening. If that's the case, this is a huge escalation of force because it's now happening allegedly in the DC area. Allegedly, I don't know if it's. I've seen very conflicting reports, but like congressional staffers getting sick, members of the CIA getting sick. I don't know. It kind of makes sense, but if it is true, and let's just go for a minute that it is, this is a huge escalation of force. This means that Russia, which their mentality has been shifting very, very severely in the past, or very drastically in the past few years, very interestingly so, in that they're developing weapons to get around rules, just like China is doing as well, and the United States too. But we might see this being one of those things. Right now, Russia is kicking our butts when it comes to information warfare. We've got half the U.S. military that's anti-military, right? Like, how many people, have seen the propaganda from Russia and been like, "Yeah, I get it." Um, so yeah, we're losing on that front by a long shot, and we're starting to see some of these alternative weapons come up. If we're starting to develop these alternative weapons that don't really leave a trace, that's more indefinable field of warfare. Like, I guess it would be what, like seventh generation warfare or something like that, where you don't know who was the attacker and it's some kind of technology that's untraceable, something like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm rambling on about something that doesn't really matter, but yeah, directed energy weapons seem like they're something to be concerned about. Maybe not for us. Maybe not for anybody who'd be watching this video. Probably doesn't care and probably doesn't really need to be too concerned. But it's something that's kind of interesting. And then same along the same lines with stuff like the UFOs stuff that's been coming out lately. I was going to do a whole slide on UFOs, but I think that's going to be a larger project because there have been a lot of stuff come out about UFOs lately. And like I mentioned last briefing, I think that it's fascinating that the same people that say the government lies about everything they do suddenly is hanging on every word when the DoD drops a statement that says, "Yeah, this UFO footage is real." So there's that element to it. I don't mean to be like insulting to anybody, but that's kind of an interesting ideology. I think it's fascinating though from an analytical standpoint because it's an untapped analytical market, right? The kinds of people, right, that spend their lives searching for aliens tend to tend to be very interesting characters. Like, turn on the History Channel at like 1 a.m. and that's your alien dude. Like, whatever's on the History Channel at 1 or 2 in the morning, that's going to be the dude who's giving a press conference on aliens, right? So I think it would be very fascinating to go down from an analytical standpoint and just flesh this idea out a little bit. Like, what would this look like? What does it mean? What are some of the concerns that we have? So we might end up doing an actual special on this. If people are interested enough, let us know if you're interested in something like that, because I'm fascinated about that from a theoretical level. I'm not sure if there's anything we can do about it, because obviously when it comes to stuff like aliens, right? Um, the stuff like that it tends to turn a lot of people off, for one, and also it's something that there's really not a whole lot you can do about it. So, why worry about it, I guess. But I don't know. Yeah, I think I've rambled on for long enough, so I think I will push it over to questions. So there's going to be a pretty significant delay on the chat from my end. There's about a 30-second delay, so I'll go ahead and see what questions we already have and see if I can answer some of them. Sorry if I don't read out the full question. I'll try to do that. I know that's kind of frustrating if you're watching this in the future. Like, well, what was the question? So yeah, let me scroll back and see. Let's see here. What are your thoughts on the U.S. funding a standing National Guard QRF from Washington, D.C.? Uh, that's not good. We've done a lot of materials on that. I think that generally speaking, the short answer is really hard to give because that's an issue that I think in order to be most effective requires a lot of groundwork to be laid. So that's why we did, and I recorded, gosh, when was that? Like 2-3 months ago, a specific podcast on exactly that. But generally speaking, it's not good, and for very many wide-ranging reasons. But yeah, not good. Of course, when it comes to things like national defense, yeah, we need some kind of defense in our national capital region, but sending 65,000 high school kids in the National Guard to DC is wrong on so many levels. As far as I'm concerned, that's my opinion. As far as I'm concerned, thoughts about the DoD. Thoughts about the DoD possibly monitoring military members' social media through private firms. Yeah, I touched on that the last briefing, I think, or maybe I just thought about it, never said it. But yeah, not good. That means that your terms of service are the de facto approval for the federal government, specifically the DoD, to reach around those laws when it comes to collections on U.S. persons. Any intel weenie out there knows things like DoD Regulation 5240.1-R or Executive Order 12333. Those regulations that govern collections on U.S. persons, that is the one thing that every intel person knows by heart what you can and cannot do when it comes to collections on U.S. persons. And for the most part, it's a huge no-no. You can't collect on U.S. persons unless they're like in the Middle East and shooting at you, and they have long history and things like that. You have to destroy all evidence if you find out that they're not, and it's just a huge deal. So yeah, the DoD sticking their nose in domestic stuff, that can't end well. It cannot have a positive ending. I don't think so. Not good. Let's see here. Thoughts on the See Something, Say Something Online Act? I don't know what that is. I have not heard of that before. My guess, based on the name of it, it's probably I hate to guess without actually knowing anything about it, but it sounds like a tattle on your neighbor program. I know a lot of states have it, we had it, or I don't know if it was a law or not, but it was definitely being pushed here in Virginia and on a lot of other liberal states to tattle on your neighbor, during last holiday season. If you had neighbors over that you weren't supposed to, they had a hotline, set it up and everything. It was garbage, so probably not great. So let me scroll back and see if we have any more questions. Can you do a video on transportation of covert or contraband items across America? Seems like we'll be hauling water and food past checkpoints in under a decade. Yes, actually, on that front. Staying within the current laws that govern our ability to speak and the platform that we're on, I will say that we have some very interesting stuff coming out. And just in case I forget to mention it, we're probably going to have a slight lull in videos coming out over the next week or so while we're finishing up a series. The start of a series, 2 series actually. We're working on that, and I want to be able for us to drop several videos very, very quickly, right behind each other, so they can get out there and be useful for everybody. But yeah, absolutely. Where are some good places to get intel online? It depends on what kind of intel you're looking for. Really, if you're looking for general news, good luck. I know that I personally spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to find out what's actually going on in the world, so much so that I feel like I'm vastly more uninformed than I was 10 years ago. Asked me 2 years ago if I had a pretty good beat on what was going on in the world. I would, every day, like I would say, yeah, I probably get a pretty good beat on things. Now, these days, man, I feel like I have no idea what's going on. um, just because it's so hard to find information. I have to use so many different terms and like Boolean operators to through search engines to get like what I need. When I'm building the slide for the shortages and the logistics slide, it takes me like 5 or 6 hours just searching just to find stuff to go on that slide. So yeah, not super easy to do. I know there are some sources out there. I would say us, but to be honest, we don't do these briefings that often enough to be good about it. But places like Telegram and Rumble and other alternative social medias that are coming up, they're not horrible. They're not great, but they're okay, I guess, for now. So let's see here. Let me scroll back and see if there are any more questions. I know we've probably got kind of a light crowd today because it's Saturday afternoon, but let me see here. Yeah. Oh, sweet. Somebody likes the 5 minute tradecraft series. Yeah, we've got a lot more videos planned on that front. It just takes a while to um, get those filmed and written up and things like that. By the time they get to me, they're almost ready. I just have to do some minor edits and of course narrate them. But yeah, that's a really good, nice, easy, bite-sized video series. Common software you use often. Software. When it comes to Intel, I think one of the best software packages you can get is Siren, um, Siren, and it is for it's like if you've ever used Palantir before, it's kind of like that, except it doesn't have the sources that make Palantir awesome. So it's kind of like Palantir and Analyst Notebook. If anybody out there knows what I'm talking about, Analyst Notebook was a back in the day program that Intel weenies like us used. Um, it's since then gone way out of favor, um, and yeah, Siren's about the only one I can think of so far. Let's see here. Have you considered buying land for S2 operations? Lots of people talk. Yeah, as far as land, um, yeah, it's just we're not. We don't make hardly any money to do so, and land in our area is very, very expensive. But yeah, if we could find, man, isn't that everybody's dream? Like to find some land and settle down. Um, yeah, that would be great. If we could do that, find a nice ranch or something like that out west where people tend to leave you alone a little bit more. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Oh, highly recommend Maltego. Yeah, that's a good one too. That's a great sort of source aggregation stuff. Yeah. Any recommendations for front door cameras, preferably one that records continuously? Get that question an awful lot. What kind of cameras to use? First of all, good on you. Having more cameras is absolutely crucial because in today's age, you want your cameras to be able to capture something and not somebody's body cam. Thing one. Thing two, don't buy. It doesn't really matter what you get. Just don't buy anything connected with Amazon or anything that streams over the internet. Would not be super secure and not be super reliable. What you would want is some kind of you could use wireless cameras. I would not recommend it. I always tend to go old school and go wired because they're just you have to physically compromise the cable, whereas you could easily jam a Wi-Fi camera. As far as specific recommendations, I would say go online and see what you can find that meets a certain set of criteria. Because here's the deal: there aren't any companies out there that make good cameras, good security cameras anymore. There just aren't. You have to buy no name brand or Chinese name branded products because there just isn't like a good name brand for security camera. They just like as far as I know, they just don't exist. So I would try finding cameras that meet the following criteria: that are capable of recording to a physical hard drive, do not have the ability to use the internet in any form or fashion, because chances are, if it uses the internet to record, that's going to be, that video is on somebody else's server. You do not want that. And then also some kind of ability to record in the dark. I myself use some no-name branded security cameras all over the places I am at and live at and things like that. So in combination with things like wildlife cams, game cameras are highly underrated when it comes to security practices, and you can get a lot of the no glow ones that don't actually have a red light glowing. Yeah, that works out great. But yeah, I would suggest looking to see what you can find online. I hate to be like that's all I've got, but that's really all I've got for that one. See, how can someone get into Intel? What does it take to get into it? It depends on what you're trying to do. Most Intel people are going to come from one background, which is federal service, some kind of either being an active duty soldier or troop or whatever, who is trained in the Intel field. You enlisted in the military and you joined up as an Intel person. Or you're going to have started off working for a federal agency, which does more or less the same thing. It's not going to really be possible to do it any other way I can think of. There are ways you could do it, like there's a lot of corporate analysts out there, but really most of the people out there that are analysts are prior military, which is what most of us are. Any recommendations for a free, as in freedom printer, yellow dot issue? As far as getting around the yellow dot issue, I can't think of any printer that doesn't do that. Maybe one that was intended not for the U.S. market. Maybe you could get on Alibaba or AliExpress and order one from China, but then you're still not guaranteed, I don't think. One that might not have federal approval, like how you can buy cheap electronics on Wish or something like that. Of course, I mean, you're supporting the Chinese government, so yeah, take that for what it is. But I suppose that you could try that and see if it works. If nothing else, it's probably going to be pretty cheap and break easily, so you might need to buy another one anyway. But yeah, that would be what I recommend. Don't buy one from a major retailer in the United States or a major brand, because those are definitely going to have it on there. How many months of food should I keep? Depends on what resources you have around you. I would say we're definitely not prepping experts. I would say as much as you can reliably store, to the point where you're not neglecting other things. But I don't know, 6 months, a year. That's a good. A year is a good benchmark to shoot for. Let's see here. Getting into Intel without going into military is an option. What kind of careers would that entail? If you're trying to get into the field of intelligence without going into the military, it would probably have to be through some kind of business administration. Private investigation is a great way to do it. So if you were to get some kind of business administration degree or something like that, some experience with corporate intelligence, there's a lot of money to be made working for companies trying to either steal other companies' designs or prevent your own designs from being stolen. So private investigation is like the only other way I can think of. I should have mentioned that earlier. Private investigation is probably one of the most common ways to get into the field of intelligence without actually um, being trained as an analyst. But I should also mention that private investigation is not analysis. Private investigation usually doesn't really involve as much analysis as you might think. A lot of times it's just collections, which is just like one step in the intel cycle. Now, I would absolutely consider private investigators to be analysts. Like, we do private investigation work sometimes. So yeah, that's a thing that is absolutely a factor. Private investigation, corporate intelligence, things like that. Let's see here. Still looking for questions. Ideas on how we, the people, can start organizing ourselves to be better prepared for what's happening. More on the lines of online, as everyone should be getting closer to their neighbors right now. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't pretend to know the answer to that. I think a lot of people out there, um, we're all kind of circling around the same issue, but without actually figuring out how to solve it. Because the issue is this: you want to be able to organize in an environment which is non-permissive, right? So you're already at a disadvantage. The environment is not permissive, in which you is not as permissive as it could be to organize. In years past, it would be pretty easy to start a club, start a club at a shooting range or something, somewhere where you could find people that have similar interests, right? And then just go from there, right? Like going back to the turn of the century, the Boy Scouts was a great organization for that. Not so much now, but back in the day, you got to remember that places like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts at early 1900s when they were first created, their goal was to train children essentially for the military, right? So if you have that kind of mindset of we need to start being able to organize and just maybe not just, we're not talking like organize a militia or anything like that. We're talking like just get to know your neighbors a little bit better. Well, right now the market is saturated, right? Like I can tell you personally, my immediate neighbors are very much activists and not the good kind, as far as I'm concerned. Because yeah, so it's really hard to make friends in the world today, but I can definitely tell you that those old school skills of being able to make friends, find people with similar interests, and move forward in that way, if you can, is ideal. Obviously, easier said than done, and I don't know of any specific way to do it other than just, I guess it's just instinctual. Just go out there and do it. Find hobbies, find places, find groups that it doesn't have to necessarily. You don't have to necessarily agree with everything a person says or does to be their friend or to be an acquaintance that has a resource. I do know that everybody seems to think that we're walking around with like our social resume, our social credit resume, right there out for everybody to see. But really, we're not. We have to deal with people that we don't necessarily agree with on 100%, which is good, I suppose. Let's see here. See any more questions? Any podcast collaborations coming up? I love them. No, not that I'm aware of. I don't think we have anything scheduled. We're really super busy. Once in about a couple weeks, you'll see why we've been so busy. I know I keep putting that off, but we've had some. Every time we take two steps forward, it's one step back. But yeah, we've definitely got some interesting stuff coming out. See, any recommendations on what VPNs to use slash avoid? Usually, I would say, as far as VPNs go, NordVPN was pretty good for a while. I haven't looked at this in a while. NordVPN was good for a while there. I don't know what they're like now. I know PIA we used for the longest time, and I think we might still do in some regards. But PIA just got bought by a shady company. There's a lot of weirdness going into that. Our tech guy knows more about that than I do. Um, but yeah, I would say any of the big names are probably the best. Anything that's not Five Eyes for sure, or actually I forgot New Zealand's not it anymore. Anything that's Four Eyes or Nine Eyes or any country that has an Intel collection platform or Intel collection agreement with the United States. But also, another note to not forget. VPNs are not your only solution because guess what? Your ISP is probably ratting you out anyway. So a VPN is a good thing, but don't treat it like you're going to be able to Google some shady stuff just because you've got a VPN. It's not how it works. You want something that's the most secure you can probably get. Tor network running on a Linux laptop that is running the Cubes OS. That is about as secure as you can get right now, and it's still not 100% secure. Let's see, what's the best place to find high-resolution satellite imagery that's updated regularly for use with ATAC? I like using the USGS. If you're talking about the United States, I think ESA, the space agency for Europe, also has a repository, but I'm not sure. I haven't checked it out in a while. But yeah, we actually have a whole video on that, how to download better imagery for ATAC. It's kind of a pain in the butt because you have to download each individual tile, but once you do it for an area, you're done. And you can sit down and when you're planning your wherever you're going, or if you're wanting to download imagery for a new location, for some kind of whatever. You're going on a trip somewhere and you need to download some imagery, you can do it pretty easily that way. But yeah, any other questions before I go ahead and punch out for the day? Hopefully everybody can enjoy their Saturday afternoon. All right, so I'm not seeing any more questions, so I will go ahead and call things. Now we've gone, wow, 20 minutes over. Sorry, guys, I'm kind of running on empty today, so I rambled on a lot more than normal. But here are our sources for today. I didn't put them all on there because some of them are just from so many different places that it doesn't really help to have them on there. If you have any other questions, of course, let us know. We enjoy comments, all that kind of stuff. Any kind of engagement helps us get past YouTube algorithms, but we're not super concerned about that. We get out there. But yeah, make sure to stay tuned. Like I keep mentioning, we've got other stuff coming out. If you're a supporter on Patreon, thank you so much, and you guys will have known that you got the slides ahead of time. So if you are a member of Patreon, we send the slides out ahead of this briefing for those early access people on Patreon as a way of just saying thanks, because you guys are funding these directly. So yeah, you guys were able to help us fund the equipment we needed to get this sort of live streaming setup working. So thank you, thank you, thank you for that. And yeah, I think we'll call it a day. Not a whole lot, nothing super dangerous or super important, I suppose, but a lot of little stuff to keep your eye on as we move forward. So make sure to stay tuned for the next